The morning my daughter-in-law forced me to wear adult diapers in front of the entire nursing staff at Willowbrook Care Center, I knew she had finally crossed a line there was no coming back from. Standing there in that sterile hallway, watching her smirk as she handed the package to the head nurse while whispering loud enough for everyone to hear that I was having accidents again, I felt something inside me snap. Not break, snap, like a rubber band that had been stretched too far for too long. By the end of that week, she would discover exactly what it felt like to lose everything she thought she owned. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Thelma Jean Bailey, and at 73 years old, I never imagined I'd be standing in a lawyer's office holding proof that my own son's wife had been stealing from me for over 2 years. But that's exactly where this story leads. So let me start from the beginning. I moved in with my son Marcus and his wife Brielle 3 years ago, not because I needed taking care of, but because they needed my help. Marcus had just started his own landscaping business, and money was tight. Real tight. Their mortgage was behind, the utilities were getting shut-off notices, and little Jasmine needed new school clothes. When I offered to sell my condo and move in with them, contributing my monthly Social Security and pension to the household expenses, they acted like I was saving their lives. And maybe I was. The first year went smoothly enough. I had my own bedroom in the basement, which I'd fixed up real nice with my furniture and photographs. Brielle seemed grateful for the financial help, and Marcus was relieved that someone could watch Jasmine after school while they both worked. I cooked dinner most nights, kept the house clean, and tried to stay out of their way when they needed couple time. But somewhere around the second year, things started shifting. Small things at first. Brielle would make comments about how I was getting forgetful when I'd ask where she'd put something I'd been looking for. She'd mentioned to neighbors how hard it was caring for an elderly parent, even though I was taking care of myself just fine. When I'd correct her, she'd give me this pitying look and say something like, "Oh, Mama T, we all forget things sometimes." Mama T. That's what she called me, like I was some doddering old grandmother instead of a woman who'd raised 4 children, worked as a bank manager for 30 years, and could still balance a checkbook better than most people half my age. The real problem started about 6 months ago when I had what doctors called a minor episode. I'd been feeling dizzy one morning and decided to sit down before I fell down. Brielle found me on the kitchen floor 20 minutes later, conscious but disoriented. The paramedics said my blood pressure had dropped, probably from the new medication I'd been prescribed, and that these things happen to people my age. Nothing serious, just needed to monitor my meds better. But Brielle acted like I'd had a stroke. Suddenly, she was hovering over everything I did. She'd watch me walk to make sure I wasn't unsteady. She'd ask if I remembered to take my pills, then check the bottle to count them. She started making doctor appointments for me without asking, telling them I was having cognitive issues that the family was concerned about. The worst part was watching Marcus buy into it. My own son, who'd spent every Sunday of his childhood helping me in the garden, who knew I could identify every plant in a 3-county area and remember the birthday of every person I'd ever met, started treating me like I was losing my mind. When I tried to talk to him about it, he'd get this uncomfortable look and say things like, "Mom, we're just trying to help." Brielle knows about these things. Brielle worked as a medical assistant at a family practice clinic, which somehow made her an expert on everything health-related, at least in Marcus's eyes. The diaper incident happened on a Thursday morning in October. I'd been staying at Willowbrook for a week because Brielle convinced Marcus I needed professional observation after I'd forgotten to turn off the stove one evening. Never mind that I'd been cooking for 50 years without burning the house down, or that I'd simply gotten distracted by Jasmine asking for help with her homework. Brielle made it sound like I was a danger to the whole family. Willowbrook wasn't a bad place, really. It was more like assisted living than a nursing home, and most of the residents were sharp as tacks. I'd been getting along fine with everyone, participating in activities, even helping some of the other ladies with their weekly card game. The staff liked me because I didn't cause trouble, and I helped out when I could. But that Thursday morning, everything changed. I was sitting in the common room reading when Brielle walked in carrying a large shopping bag. She had that smile on her face, the one that never quite reached her eyes, and she was talking to Mrs. Henderson, the head nurse, in that loud, concerned voice she used whenever she wanted an audience. "I'm just so worried about her dignity," she was saying as they approached. "She's been having more and more accidents, And she gets so embarrassed. I thought maybe if we could just make the transition easier for her. That's when she pulled the package of adult diapers out of the bag. I felt my face burn with humiliation as conversations around the room gradually stopped. Mrs. Henderson looked uncomfortable, glancing between Brielle and me with obvious confusion. "Mrs. Bailey," she said carefully, "we haven't noticed any issues with incontinence. Perhaps we should discuss this privately?" But Brielle was already opening the package, shaking her head sadly. "She's gotten very good at hiding it, haven't you, Mama T? But we can't pretend anymore. It's not safe or sanitary." I found my voice then, though it came out shakier than I wanted. "Brielle, I don't need those. I haven't had any accidents." She turned to me with that pitying expression I'd come to hate. "Honey, denial is part of the process." Dr. Martinez explained that to Marcus and me. "The important thing is keeping you comfortable and clean." Dr. Martinez, my own doctor, who I'd been seeing for 15 years, who knew perfectly well that I was mentally competent. Except I was starting to realize that maybe Brielle had been having conversations with him that I wasn't aware of. Mrs. Henderson was looking more and more uncomfortable. "Perhaps we should call your son to discuss this?" "Oh, Marcus knows all about it," Brielle said quickly. "He's the one who suggested we make the change now, while she's here where you can help her adjust." The room had gone completely quiet now. I could feel everyone staring, some with sympathy, others with that morbid curiosity people get when they're watching someone else's dignity get stripped away piece by piece. That's when I stood up, my hands shaking but my voice steady. "I am not wearing those diapers because I don't need them. And if anyone has questions about my mental state, they can ask me directly instead of talking around me like I'm not here." Brielle's mask slipped for just a second, and I saw something cold flash in her eyes before she caught herself. "Mama T, please don't make this harder than it has to be. We're all just trying to help you." But Mrs. Henderson was studying me carefully now, and I could see the wheels turning in her head. She was a good nurse, and good nurses know the difference between someone who's confused and someone who's being manipulated. "Why don't we table this discussion for now?" she said diplomatically. "Mrs. Bailey, would you like to call your son yourself?" I nodded, grateful that at least one person in the room was treating me like an adult. But as Mrs. Henderson walked away with the unopened package of diapers, I caught Brielle's expression when she thought no one was looking. She wasn't embarrassed or concerned. She was angry. Angry that her little performance hadn't gone the way.
Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time. So if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story.
She'd planned. That's when I knew for certain that this wasn't about my health or safety. This was about something else entirely. Something that had to do with control and money, and the fact that Brielle had been planning something that required everyone to believe I was incompetent. When I called Marcus that afternoon, he sounded tired and stressed. "Mom, Brielle's just trying to help. Maybe you should consider that she might know what's best right now." "Marcus," I said carefully, "when have I ever had issues with incontinence? When have I ever given you reason to think I can't take care of my basic needs?" There was a long pause. "Well, you have been forgetting things more often, and that dizzy spell really scared us." "Forgetting what things? Be specific." Another pause. "Brielle keeps track of all that better than I do, Mom. She's the one who notices when you put the milk in the pantry instead of the refrigerator, or when you can't remember if you've taken your pills." I felt my heart sink, because I had never put milk in the pantry. I had never forgotten to take my medication. But somehow, Brielle had convinced my son that I had. "Marcus, I want to come home. Today." "Mom, the doctor said you should stay there for observation. Just a few more days to make sure you're stable." "What doctors?" "I haven't seen any doctors here except for the routine check-in when I arrived." There was confusion in his voice now, but Brielle said Dr. Martinez recommended the extended stay after your evaluation. "What evaluation?" The silence stretched so long I thought the call had dropped. Finally Marcus said, "I'll pick you up tomorrow morning. We can sort all this out at home." But when I hung up, I knew that sorting it out at home might not be possible, because Brielle had been very busy building a narrative. And she'd done it so carefully that even my own son believed it. That night, I lay awake in the narrow bed at Willowbrook, staring at the ceiling and thinking about all the little things that had seemed strange over the past few months. The way Brielle always seemed to be around when I was talking to Marcus about anything important. The way she'd started handling all my mail, claiming she was helping me stay organized. The way she'd begun scheduling all my doctor appointments and insisting on coming with me to help me remember what the doctor said. I thought about the day she'd suggested I sign a power of attorney form, just in case something happened. How she'd explained it would make things easier for Marcus if there was ever an emergency. How I'd trusted her enough to sign it without reading every word. I thought about my bank statements, which Brielle had offered to help me organize, since paperwork can be so confusing. How grateful I'd been for the help, since my arthritis sometimes made writing difficult. And I thought about the conversation I'd overheard between Brielle and her sister Denise a few weeks ago, when they didn't know I was in the backyard hanging laundry. Denise had been asking how much longer Brielle thought it would take, and Brielle had laughed and said something about a few more months of establishing the pattern. At the time, I'd assumed they were talking about Brielle's work schedule or maybe planning a vacation. But lying there in that narrow bed, listening to Mrs. Patterson snore in the next room, I started to wonder if they'd been talking about something else entirely. The next morning, Marcus picked me up as promised, but Brielle came with him. She sat in the front seat chattering about how nice it would be to have me home, how she'd prepared all my favorite foods, how we could take things one day at a time. But when we pulled into the driveway, I noticed something that made my stomach drop. There was a ramp leading up to the front porch that hadn't been there when I left. "What's that for?" I asked as Marcus helped me out of the car. "We thought it might be easier for you," Brielle said quickly. "You know, in case you have trouble with the steps." I looked at the 3 small steps I'd been walking up and down without any trouble for 3 years. "I don't have trouble with the steps." "Well, not yet," she said in that patient voice. But Dr. Martinez thought it would be good to be proactive. There it was again, Dr. Martinez and his supposed recommendations that I had never heard directly from him. Inside the house, I noticed other changes. The scatter rugs in the hallway were gone. The coffee table in the living room had been moved against the wall. My rocking chair had been replaced with a recliner that had a lift assist feature. "We made some safety modifications," Marcus explained, looking proud of himself. "Brielle researched what would be best for someone in your situation. My situation. As if I was an invalid instead of a woman who'd been living independently just fine. But the biggest shock came when I went down to my basement bedroom. The lock on my door was gone. In its place was one of those sliding latches that could only be opened from the outside. "What is this?" I asked, pointing at the latch. Brielle appeared behind me so quickly it was like she'd been waiting for this moment. "It's for safety, Mama T. We can't have you wandering around at night if you get confused. You could hurt yourself." "I don't wander around at night. And I don't get confused." "Honey, you might not remember if you do. That's how these things work." I turned to look at Marcus, hoping to see some recognition in his eyes that this was going too far. But he was looking at the floor, his jaw tight with what looked like embarrassment. "Mom, it's just temporary. Until we know you're stable." That's when I realized that while I'd been gone for a week, Brielle had been busy convincing Marcus that I was much worse off than I actually was. She'd probably told him stories about things I'd supposedly done or said. She'd probably painted a picture of a woman who was rapidly declining and needed constant supervision. And my son, who loved me but who was struggling with his own business and family responsibilities, had chosen to believe her rather than trust his own observations. That night, I lay in my basement bedroom listening to the sound of that latch sliding closed above me. Brielle had helped me get ready for bed, laying out my nightgown and making sure I had everything I needed. She'd brought me a cup of chamomile tea to help me sleep better, and had stood there watching until I drank it all. Within an hour, I was drowsier than I'd ever been in my life. And that's when I knew that whatever was in that tea wasn't just chamomile. But even through the fog of whatever she'd given me, my mind was working. Because I was starting to understand that this wasn't just about control, this was about money. My money. I'd contributed over $40,000 to this household in the past 3 years. My Social Security and pension came to nearly $3,000 a month. If something happened to me, or if I was declared incompetent, that money would stop coming. Unless someone had legal authority to manage my affairs. Someone like a daughter-in-law with power of attorney, who'd spent months establishing a pattern of mental decline in front of witnesses. As I drifted off to sleep, fighting against whatever drug was pulling me under, I made myself a promise. Tomorrow I was going to start fighting back. And Brielle Carlisle Bailey was going to discover that she'd picked the wrong old lady to mess with. Because I might be 73 years old, but I wasn't helpless. And I wasn't stupid. And I definitely wasn't going down without a fight. The next morning, I woke up groggy and disoriented, with a bitter taste in my mouth that no amount of teeth brushing could eliminate. The clock beside my bed read 10:30, which shocked me because I'd been an early riser my entire life. By the time I managed to get dressed and make it upstairs, the house was empty except for a note on the kitchen counter. Mama T, gone to Jasmine's school conference. Back around noon. Your pills are on the counter. Take them with food. Love, Brielle. My pills. I walked over to the counter and found 3 small paper cups, each containing different medications. I recognized my blood pressure medicine and my with your memory. I palmed the pill as I brought the cup to my mouth, pretending to swallow while actually tucking it under my tongue. Then I drank some coffee to wash down the bitter taste and smiled at her. Thank you, honey. I do feel like my memory's been fuzzy lately. She smiled back, satisfied. It's normal at your age. The important thing is that we're taking care of it. After Brielle left to run errands, I spit the pill into a tissue and examined it closely. It was identical to the pills in her lorazepam bottle. I had my proof. My own daughter-in-law was drugging me with anti-anxiety medication, making me drowsy and confused, then using that confusion as evidence that I was mentally declining. The question was, what was I going to do about it? I looked at the clock. It was 12:30, which gave me time to do some research before my doctor's appointment. I went down to my basement room and pulled out the laptop I'd bought last year, the one Brielle didn't know about, because I'd had it delivered to my friend Margaret's house. It took me a while to figure out how to research the pills, but eventually I found what I was looking for. Lorazepam, when given to elderly patients without proper medical supervision, could cause exactly the symptoms Brielle had been describing to everyone: confusion, disorientation, memory problems, and increased fall risk. More importantly, I learned that giving someone prescription medication without their knowledge was considered assault in our state. It was a felony that could result in prison time. But I also knew that I needed more than just my word against hers. I needed documentation, I needed witnesses, and I needed to be very, very careful about how I proceeded. At 2 o'clock, I took a taxi to Dr. Martinez's office. I'd told Brielle I was taking a nap, and I'd climbed out my basement window to avoid being seen leaving. It felt ridiculous, sneaking out of my own home like a teenager, but I couldn't risk her knowing where I was going. Dr. Martinez was a kind man who'd been treating me since my husband died 15 years ago. When I explained what had been happening, his face grew increasingly grave. Thelma, these are very serious accusations. Are you certain about what you're telling me? I showed him the pill I'd palmed that morning and explained how I'd found the matching prescription in Brielle's medicine cabinet. I told him about the nightly tea and the way I'd been waking up groggy and disoriented. He examined the pill carefully, then made some notes in my file. I'm going to order some blood tests. If you've been taking lorazepam regularly, it should still be detectable in your system. I'm also going to document everything you've told me today. Dr. Martinez, she's been telling people that you recommended all these safety measures for me. The wheelchair ramp, the modified furniture, even the stay at Willowbrook. His expression hardened. I've made no such recommendations. In fact, at your last visit 3 months ago, I noted that you were in excellent health for your age, both physically and mentally. Can you write that down? Officially? He nodded. I'm going to write a detailed assessment of your current mental state and your medical history. This kind of elder abuse is more common than people realize, and it's often perpetrated by family members who have financial motivations. Elder abuse. Hearing him say those words out loud made everything real in a way it hadn't been before. I wasn't just dealing with a difficult daughter-in-law. I was the victim of a crime. What should I do? I asked. First, we get those blood tests done today. Then you need to contact Adult Protective Services and possibly the police. Do you have somewhere safe to stay while this gets sorted out? I thought about Margaret, my friend who lived across town. We'd known each other for over 40 years, and she'd never liked Brielle. She'd told me more than once that she thought my daughter-in-law was too sweet to be genuine. Yes, I said. I think I do. Dr. Martinez arranged for the blood tests to be done immediately, then wrote out a detailed report documenting my cognitive calcium supplement, but the third cup contained a white pill I'd never seen before. I dumped the unknown pill into my hand and studied it carefully. There were numbers stamped on one side, which I wrote down on a piece of paper. Then I put the pill back in the cup and left everything exactly as I'd found it. Instead of taking any of the medications, I made myself a cup of coffee and sat down at the kitchen table to think. The fog from the night before was finally clearing, and I was starting to remember things more clearly, like the fact that I'd never needed help managing my medications before Brielle started organizing them for me. Like the fact that I'd never had trouble sleeping until she started bringing me that special tea. I walked to the kitchen phone and dialed Dr. Martinez's office. When the receptionist answered, I asked to speak with him directly. I'm sorry, Mrs. Bailey, but Dr. Martinez is with patients all morning. Can I take a message? This is important. I need to know what medications he's prescribed for me in the past 6 months. There was a pause. Let me pull your file. Okay, I see you're on lisinopril for blood pressure and calcium supplements. That's all we have you on currently. What about sleep aids? Or anything for anxiety or confusion? No, ma'am. Dr. Martinez hasn't prescribed anything like that for you. Is there a problem? I felt my heart start racing. Can you tell me if anyone else has called requesting information about my medications or mental state? Another pause. I'm not supposed to discuss that over the phone. Would you like to schedule an appointment to talk with Dr. Martinez directly? Yes, today if possible. We've had a cancellation for this afternoon. Can you be here at 2 o'clock? I agreed and hung up, my hands shaking slightly. If Dr. Martinez hadn't prescribed the white pill, where had it come from? And what exactly was I taking every night in that chamomile tea? I spent the next hour searching the house methodically. In the back of the bathroom medicine cabinet, behind Marcus's allergy medications, I found a prescription bottle with Brielle's name on it. The medication was lorazepam, prescribed for anxiety. The pills in the bottle looked exactly like the white pill I'd found in my morning cup. Lorazepam. I'd heard of it before. It was the kind of medication that could make someone drowsy and confused, especially if they weren't supposed to be taking it. Especially if someone was crushing it up and putting it in their tea every night. I was still standing in the bathroom, holding the prescription bottle, when I heard Brielle's car in the driveway. I quickly put the bottle back where I'd found it and made it to the kitchen just as she walked through the front door. There you are, she said brightly. I was wondering when you'd get up. Did you take your morning pills? Not yet, I said, watching her face carefully. I was waiting to eat something first. Good girl, she said, and the condescending tone made my skin crawl. I picked up some of those yogurts you like. Let me get you one. She bustled around the kitchen, chattering about Jasmine's teacher conference, how well Jasmine was doing in school, how proud Marcus was of his daughter. Normal conversation, except for the way she kept glancing at the paper cups on the counter. Here you go, she said, setting a strawberry yogurt in front of me. Now you can take your pills. I picked up the first cup and swallowed the blood pressure medication. Then I picked up the second cup and took the calcium supplement. When I reached for the third cup, Brielle watched me like a hawk. I brought the cup to my lips, then pretended to stumble slightly, spilling the contents across the table. Oh no, I said, trying to sound distressed. I'm so clumsy today. Brielle's face flashed with something that might have been annoyance before she caught herself. Don't worry about it, Mama T. Accidents happen. Let me get you another one. She moved quickly to a cabinet I'd never seen her open before and pulled out a small bottle. She shook one pill into a paper cup and brought it back to me. There you go, she said, watching as I took it. This one's important. It helps function and physical health. He also gave me a letter stating that he had never recommended any of the safety modifications that had been made to the house, nor had he suggested institutionalization. Thelma, he said as I prepared to leave, I want you to be very careful. If Brielle realizes you're onto her, she might escalate her behavior. People who commit this type of abuse often become desperate when they think they're about to be caught. I took a taxi back home, climbed through my basement window, and spent the rest of the afternoon lying on my bed staring at the ceiling. My mind was racing with everything I'd learned and everything I needed to do. I thought about Marcus and how I was going to tell him that his wife had been systematically poisoning and manipulating me. I thought about Jasmine and how this would affect her when the truth came out. I thought about the life I'd built with this family and how Brielle had been planning to destroy it all along. But mostly I thought about the power of attorney document I'd signed and what Brielle might have been doing with access to my finances. When I heard her car in the driveway that evening, I pretended to be asleep. She came down to check on me, and I could feel her standing in the doorway for a long time, just watching. It took every ounce of self-control I had not to open my eyes and confront her right then and there. Instead, I waited until I heard her footsteps going back upstairs. Then I got up quietly and went to the filing cabinet where I kept my important papers. The lock had been broken, and when I opened the drawer, half of my documents were missing. My bank statements, investment records, insurance policies, and the deed to my old condo were all gone. In their place was a single folder containing what looked like applications for various assisted living facilities. Brielle hadn't just been drugging me and establishing a pattern of mental decline. She'd been preparing to have me committed to a facility where she could control my finances completely. I sat there in my basement room, holding those applications, and felt something I hadn't felt in months. Pure, cold anger. Not the helpless frustration I'd been living with, but the kind of focused rage that comes when you realize someone has been playing a long game at your expense. Tomorrow, I was going to start playing a game of my own. And unlike Brielle, I wasn't going to lose. I spent most of that night awake, planning my next moves with the kind of methodical precision I'd learned during my years as a bank manager. I knew I had to be smart about this. One wrong step, and Brielle could claim I was having another episode and have me committed before I could prove what she'd been doing. The first thing I needed was to secure my finances. At 6 a.m, while Brielle and Marcus were still asleep, I called my bank's customer service line and asked to speak with the fraud department. I need to report unauthorized access to my accounts, I told the representative. I believe someone has been using a power of attorney document to make transactions without my knowledge. The woman on the phone was professional and thorough. She took down all my information and explained that they would immediately flag my accounts and require my physical presence and identification for any future transactions. Mrs. Bailey, I'm showing several transactions over the past few months that might be of concern. There have been large cash withdrawals and transfers to accounts that aren't in your name. When can you come in to review these with us? My hands were shaking as I wrote down the appointment time. Can you tell me how much money we're talking about? There was a pause. Over the past 6 months, approximately $28,000 has been moved out of your accounts. $28,000. Nearly half of my life savings, gone. I managed to keep my voice steady as I thanked her and hung up, but inside I was reeling. Brielle hadn't just been planning to steal from me in the future. She'd already been doing it for months. I heard movement upstairs and quickly got dressed. When I went up to the kitchen, Marcus was there making coffee, looking tired and stressed as usual. "Morning, Mom," he said, giving me a distracted kiss on the cheek. "How did you sleep?" "Fine," I lied. "Marcus, can I ask you something?" "Sure." "Has Brielle mentioned anything about my finances lately? Any concerns about my accounts or my ability to manage money?" He looked uncomfortable. "Well, she did say you've been having trouble with math lately. Like, not being able to balance your checkbook or forgetting to pay bills. Why?" "Because I've never had trouble with math, and I've been balancing checkbooks since before you were born." "Has she shown you any evidence of these supposed problems?" Marcus set down his coffee cup and studied my face. For a moment, I saw a flicker of the sharp, observant boy he'd been before life wore him down. "No," he said slowly. "She just mentioned it in passing. Said it was normal for people your age." "Marcus, I need you to really think about this. Have you personally witnessed me having any mental difficulties? Or are you just taking Brielle's word for it?" The question hung in the air between us. I could see him mentally reviewing the past few months, looking for his own observations rather than his wife's reports. "I guess 100, he started, then stopped. I mean, you did have that dizzy spell, which was caused by medication and had nothing to do with my mental state. What else? He was quiet for a long time. Nothing, he finally admitted. Nothing that I've seen myself. That's when Brielle appeared in the doorway, already dressed and ready for work. She looked between Marcus and me, and I could see her antenna go up immediately. "What are you two talking about so seriously?" she asked, with a bright smile that didn't fool me anymore. "Just catching up," I said easily. "Brielle, I need to run some errands today. Banking stuff. Can you give me a ride into town?" Something flickered in her eyes. "Oh, honey, I don't think that's a good idea. You get so confused with all that financial stuff. Why don't you tell me what you need and I can take care of it for you? I appreciate the offer, but I'd prefer to handle it myself. Mama T, we've talked about this. You signed the power of attorney, so I could help you with these things. It's better if I manage the complicated stuff." I looked at Marcus, who was watching this exchange with growing unease. "Marcus, did you know your wife has been making withdrawals from my bank accounts?" The color drained from his face. "What?" Brielle's mask slipped completely for just a second, and I saw pure panic before she caught herself. "That's not..." "Marcus, she's getting confused again. I've only helped her pay bills and organize her statements." $28,000 worth of bill paying? I asked calmly. The kitchen went dead silent. Marcus looked like someone had punched him in the stomach. "That's not possible," he said weakly. I pulled the bank's phone number out of my pocket and handed it to him. "Call them. Ask them to verify the withdrawals made under my power of attorney in the past 6 months. Brielle stepped forward quickly. "Marcus, don't let her manipulate you like this. This is exactly what Dr. Martinez warned us about. Paranoid delusions are common in early dementia." But Marcus was already dialing the number. While he waited for someone to answer, I looked directly at Brielle. "You made one mistake," I said quietly. "You should have been satisfied with stealing my money. But when you decided to humiliate me with those diapers, when you decided to make me feel like less than human, you crossed a line." She opened her mouth to respond, but Marcus was talking to someone at the bank. I watched her face as he asked about recent transactions on my accounts. Watched her realize that her carefully constructed house of cards was about to come tumbling down. When Marcus hung up the phone, he looked at his wife like he'd never seen her before. "Brielle," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "They confirmed it. $28,000 in unauthorized withdrawals." She started to cry then, the kind of theatrical sobbing she'd perfected over the years. "Marcus, you don't understand. I was trying to protect the family. Your business was failing, we were about to lose the house. I was just borrowing from her accounts to keep us afloat until things got better." "Borrowing?" I said. "Is that what you call stealing from someone after you've been drugging them to make them appear incompetent?" Marcus's head snapped toward me. "Drugging?" I went to the counter and picked up the paper cup with the white pill in it. "This isn't a memory medication. It's your wife's anti-anxiety prescription. She's been crushing these up and putting them in my tea every night for months." I could see Marcus trying to process this information, trying to reconcile the woman he'd married with the criminal I was describing. "Brielle," he said slowly, "tell me this isn't true." But instead of denying it, she went on the attack. "She's lying, Marcus. Can't you see what she's doing? She's trying to turn you against me, because she's losing her mind and she's scared. This is textbook paranoid behavior. Then you won't mind if we call Dr. Martinez right now and ask him about all these recommendations you've been attributing to him?" The fight went out of her then. She sank into a kitchen chair and put her head in her hands. For a moment, the only sound was the tick of the old clock on the kitchen wall. When Brielle finally looked up, her face was streaked with mascara, but her eyes were calculating rather than remorseful. "Fine," she said quietly. "Maybe I made some mistakes. But everything I did was for this family. Marcus, your business was 3 months behind on payments. The mortgage company was starting foreclosure proceedings. I had to do something." "You had to steal from my mother?" "I had to save our home," she snapped, her composure cracking completely. "Do you know what it's like, watching your husband work 18-hour days and still not be able to pay the bills? Do you know what it's like having to tell your daughter, That she can't have new shoes because we can't afford them? Marcus looked stricken. Brielle, why didn't you tell me things were that bad? Because you were already working yourself to death? Because I didn't want to add to your stress. She turned to me then, and the venom in her voice was shocking. And she was just sitting on all that money, hoarding it like some old miser while her own family struggled. That money, I said evenly, was my life savings. Money I earned working for 30 years. Money I was planning to leave to Marcus and Jasmine when I died. Money that you stole while pretending to care about my well-being. I was going to pay it back, she said, but even she didn't sound convinced. With what? You don't have a job that pays enough to replace $28,000. And even if you did, the theft was just the beginning, wasn't it? You were planning to have me declared incompetent so you could access all my money legally. Marcus was staring at his wife like he was seeing her for the first time. The applications for assisted living facilities. That's what those were about. Brielle's face went white. How did you? I found them in my filing cabinet, I said. After you stole my financial documents. Tell me, Brielle, what was the plan? Have me committed somewhere cheap so you could pocket the difference from my monthly income? Or were you planning to sell my condo and keep the proceeds? The silence stretched until Marcus finally spoke. Get out! Brielle's head whipped toward him. What? Get out of my house, now. Before I call the police. Marcus, you can't be serious. I'm your wife. We have a daughter together. You drugged my mother. You stole from her. You tried to have her committed to an institution so you could steal more. What kind of person does that? Brielle stood up so fast her chair toppled over. The kind of person who is trying to save her family. The kind of person who is willing to do whatever it took to keep us from losing everything. By destroying an innocent woman's life? She's 73 years old, Marcus. How much life does she have left? Anyway, I was just trying to make sure Jasmine had a future. The words hung in the air like a slap. Marcus took a step back from his wife, his face a mask of disgust. You're a monster, he said quietly. I married a monster, and I was too stupid to see it. Brielle's expression shifted again, this time to cold calculation. You think you can just throw me out? I'm Jasmine's mother. I have rights. And if you try to turn my daughter against me, I'll make sure everyone knows about your mother's mental problems. I'll make sure they know she's not competent to manage her own affairs. That's when I realized she still thought she could win this. Even caught red-handed, she believed she could manipulate her way out of the consequences. Actually, I said, pulling Dr. Martinez's letter from my pocket, you can't do that. Because I have documentation from my doctor stating that I'm mentally competent and have been all along. I also have blood test results showing lorazepam in my system despite never being prescribed that medication. Her face went ashen as I continued. I've already contacted Adult Protective Services and filed a report with the police. Detective Morrison will be here within the hour to take your statement about the theft and the drugging. You're bluffing. I smiled for the first time in months. Am I? You drugged me for months, Brielle. You tried to gaslight me into believing I was losing my mind. You stole my money and tried to steal my dignity. Did you really think I was going to just roll over and let you get away with it? Marcus was looking at me with something that might have been respect. Mom, when did you? Yesterday. While you thought I was napping, I was gathering evidence and filing reports. Amazing what a supposedly incompetent old woman can accomplish when she sets her mind to it. Brielle was backing toward the door now, her face cycling through emotions too fast to track. This isn't over, she said. I know things about this family. Things that could hurt all of you. Like what? I asked calmly. Like the fact that Marcus has been hiding income from his business to avoid paying taxes. Like the fact that his books are cooked 6 ways from Sunday. Marcus went very still. That's not true. Isn't it? How do you think I knew there was money available to borrow? I've been doing your books for 2 years, Marcus. I know exactly how much cash you've been skimming. I felt my heart sink as I saw the truth in my son's face. He hadn't been struggling as much as I'd thought. He'd been hiding money, and Brielle had been using that knowledge to justify her theft. "Marcus," I said quietly, "is this true?" He couldn't look at me. "Mom, it's not as bad as she's making it sound. I've been setting aside some cash for emergencies. Small amounts. Nothing that would hurt anyone." "How much?" "Maybe 10,000 over the past 2 years." Brielle laughed bitterly. "Try 30,000. Hidden in a safety deposit box at First National. Money that should have been going to pay taxes and legitimate business expenses." I felt like the floor was dropping out from under me. My son, who I'd raised to be honest and hardworking, had been committing tax fraud. And his wife had been using that information to manipulate him into allowing her to steal from me. "So you see," Brielle continued, "we all have secrets. And if you think you can destroy me without destroying him, you're more demented than I thought." That's when the doorbell rang. Marcus looked at me with panic in his eyes. "Mom, please. Think about Jasmine. Think about what this will do to her." I looked at my son, this man I'd raised and loved and sacrificed for, and I felt something break inside me. Not my resolve, but my illusions. The family I'd thought I was protecting didn't exist. Maybe it never had. "I am thinking about Jasmine," I said. "I'm thinking about what kind of example we set when we let criminals get away with their crimes just because they're family." I walked to the front door and opened it. Detective Morrison was standing there with another officer, both of them looking professional and serious. "Mrs. Bailey, I'm Detective Morrison. We spoke on the phone yesterday." "Yes, Detective, please come in. The person you need to speak with is in the kitchen." As the officers entered the house, I heard Brielle's voice rising in panic. "Marcus, don't let them do this. Think about our daughter. Think about what this will do to our family." But Marcus wasn't thinking about family anymore. He was thinking about prison sentences and tax evasion charges and how his life had just imploded in the span of 20 minutes. Detective Morrison was thorough and professional. He took statements from all of us, examined the evidence I'd gathered, and called Dr. Martinez to verify the medical documentation. When he was finished, he placed Brielle under arrest for elder abuse, theft, and assault. As they led her away in handcuffs, she looked back at me with pure hatred. "This isn't over, Thelma. I'll make sure you regret this." "I already regret it," I said. "I regret trusting you. I regret not seeing what you were sooner. But I don't regret stopping you." After the police left, Marcus and I sat in the living room in stunned silence. The house felt different now, like a stage set after the actors had gone home. "What happens now?" he asked finally. "Now you call a tax attorney and figure out how to clean up your mess," I said. "And I figure out where to go from here. Mom, you don't have to leave. This is your home too." I looked around the room, at the furniture we'd arranged together, at the pictures of family gatherings that would never happen again. No, Marcus, this was never my home. It was Brielle's house, and I was just the bank account that kept it running. That's not fair, isn't it? When was the last time you asked my opinion about anything that mattered? When was the last time you treated me like an equal instead of a burden to be managed? He was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice was small. "I thought I was protecting you." "From what? From having a voice in my own life? From making my own decisions? From being treated like an adult? From getting hurt? From making mistakes?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Marcus, I raised 4 children, managed a bank branch, survived the death of my husband, and rebuilt my life from scratch at 60 years old. What exactly did you think I needed protection from?" "I don't know," he admitted. "Brielle just made it all seem so logical. She said elderly people often don't realize when they're declining. She said it was our responsibility to step in before something bad happened. And it never occurred to you to ask me how I felt about that responsibility?" He shook his head, looking miserable. "I'm sorry, Mom. I'm so sorry." I stood up and walked to the window, looking out at the street where I'd taken so many walks, where I'd felt like I belonged to something. Sorry doesn't give me back the months of my life that your wife stole. Sorry doesn't undo the humiliation of being treated like an invalid. Sorry doesn't restore my faith in my own family. What can I do? How can I fix this? I turned back to him. This man who looked so much like his father but who lacked his father's strength of character. You can start by telling the truth. To the IRS. To your attorney. To Jasmine when she's old enough to understand. You can stop hiding behind excuses and take responsibility for your choices. And then you can learn to live with the consequences. Just like I'm going to have to. I went downstairs to pack my things. It didn't take long since Brielle had already stolen most of my important documents. I folded my clothes carefully, wrapped my photographs in tissue paper, and packed the few mementos that meant something to me. When I was finished, I called Margaret. She answered on the first ring, as if she'd been waiting. Thelma? Thank God. I've been worried sick since you called yesterday. Can you come pick me up? I need somewhere to stay while I figure out what comes next. I'm already in the car. While I waited for Margaret, I sat on my bed and thought about the woman I'd been when I first moved into this house. Grateful, accommodating, eager to be helpful, willing to make myself smaller to avoid conflict. It had taken me 3 years to realize that making yourself smaller doesn't protect you from people who want to make you disappear entirely. When Margaret arrived, Marcus helped carry my suitcases to her car. At the last minute, he grabbed my arm. Mom, I love you. I know I messed up, but I love you. I looked at this man who shared my blood but who had chosen his wife's lies over his mother's truth. I love you too, Marcus, but love isn't enough anymore. Trust is earned, and you're going to have to start from zero. Margaret's house was warm and comfortable, filled with the smell of coffee and the sound of classical music playing softly in the background. She'd prepared the guest room with fresh flowers and had made my favorite soup for dinner. You don't have to talk about it if you don't want to, she said as we sat in her kitchen. But I'm here when you're ready. So I told her everything. About the drugging and the stolen money and the systematic campaign to make me believe I was losing my mind. About Marcus's betrayal and the family that had never really accepted me as an equal member. Margaret listened without interrupting, her face growing more and more angry as the story unfolded. That evil little witch, she said when I finished. I always knew there was something wrong with her. Too sweet, too helpful, too perfect. People like that are usually hiding something. I should have listened to you. Honey, you were trying to be a good mother and grandmother. There's nothing wrong with that. The problem was with them, not with you. That night, I lay in Margaret's guest room and thought about what I wanted my life to look like going forward. I was 73 years old, but I wasn't dead yet. I had money that Brielle hadn't been able to steal, skills that hadn't deteriorated, and now I had clarity about what kind of people I wanted in my life. The next morning, I called my bank and learned that they'd been able to recover most of the stolen money. Brielle's spending had been sloppy and easy to trace. The funds she'd used to pay household bills could be recovered through restitution. The cash withdrawals were gone, but they represented less than $5,000. I also learned something interesting. The bank had security footage of all the transactions made under my power of attorney. In every single video, Brielle was alone. She'd never brought me to the bank to authorize the withdrawals herself. She'd been forging my signature on withdrawal slips for months. Mrs. Bailey, the bank manager said, we should have caught this sooner. The pattern was clearly fraudulent, and we're implementing new policies to prevent this from happening to other customers. I appreciated his honesty, but I was more interested in the future than in assigning blame for the past. What I need to know is whether my accounts are secure now. Completely secure. We've invalidated the power of attorney and flagged your accounts for additional verification. No one can access your money without your physical presence and identification. Good. I'd like to move my accounts to your branch across town. I'll be living in that area now. Of course. We can handle that transfer immediately. When I left the bank, I felt lighter than I had in months. My money was safe, my medical records were clear, and my mind was my own again. For the first time since this whole nightmare began, I felt like myself. That afternoon, Detective Morrison called to update me on the case. Brielle had been charged with multiple felonies and was being held on $50,000 bail. Her public defender was already talking about a plea deal. "The district attorney wants to know if you'd be willing to testify at trial," he said. "Absolutely." "Good. I should also tell you that we've opened an investigation into your son's business practices. The information his wife provided about tax evasion is being reviewed by the IRS." My heart sank. What does that mean for him? "That depends on what they find and whether he cooperates. If he comes forward voluntarily and pays the back taxes with penalties, he might avoid criminal charges. If he fights it, he could be looking at serious jail time." After I hung up, I called Marcus. He sounded exhausted when he answered. "Mom?" "Marcus, you need to call a tax attorney today. Detective Morrison told me the IRS is investigating your business." There was a long silence. "I know. They called this morning." "What are you going to do?" "I don't know. The attorney I talked to said I could face 5 years in prison if they decide to prosecute. Or you could cooperate, pay what you owe, and try to rebuild your life honestly." "With what money? The business is finished. Who's going to trust a landscaper who's been arrested for tax fraud?" I felt a pang of sympathy for him, but I pushed it down. "That's not my problem to solve, Marcus. You made these choices." "I know, I don't know how to tell Jasmine that her mother's in jail, and her father might be going too." That stopped me. In all of this mess, I'd been thinking about Jasmine as an abstract concept, a name that Brielle used to manipulate people. But she was a real little girl who was about to lose everything she'd ever known. Where is she now? "At school. I haven't figured out what to tell her when she gets home." "The truth," I said. "Age-appropriate truth, but truth nonetheless. Children are stronger than you think, and they deserve honesty. Mom, would you consider talking to her? She's always loved you, and I think she might take it better coming from you." I closed my eyes, feeling the weight of his request. Part of me wanted to say no, to walk away from this family's problems, and start fresh somewhere else. But Jasmine was innocent in all of this. She was the only member of that household who had never lied to me or tried to manipulate me. "I'll think about it," I said. That evening, Margaret and I sat on her porch drinking tea and watching the sunset. She'd lived in this neighborhood for 40 years and knew everyone on the street. People waved as they walked by, and several stopped to chat. "You could stay here, you know," Margaret said, as an elderly man with a small dog stopped to talk about the weather. "I've got plenty of room, and I'd enjoy the company." "That's very kind, but I need my own space. I need to feel independent again." "Have you thought about what you want to do?" I had been thinking about it, actually. For months, I'd felt like my life was shrinking, like I was becoming less and less relevant to the world around me. But now, with my mind clear and my finances secure, I could see possibilities I hadn't considered in years. "I want to go back to work," I said. Margaret looked surprised. "What kind of work?" "I don't know yet. Maybe something with elder advocacy. Maybe volunteering at the hospital or the library. I want to do something useful with my time instead of just waiting around to die." "You're only 73, Thelma. You've got years left to make a difference." The next morning, I called the local elder advocacy office and asked about volunteer opportunities. The director, a woman named Patricia Chen, invited me to come in for an interview. "We desperately need volunteers who understand financial abuse," she told me. "It's one of the most common forms of elder abuse, but it's also one of the hardest to detect and prosecute." I spent 2 hours talking with Patricia about my experience and about the gaps I'd noticed in the system. By the time I left, I had a volunteer position as a financial abuse advocate and a schedule that would keep me busy 3 days a week. I also had something I hadn't had in months: a sense of purpose. That afternoon, I drove to Marcus's house to talk to Jasmine. She was sitting at the kitchen table doing homework when I arrived, her dark hair falling across her face as she concentrated on a math worksheet. "Grandma Thelma," she said, jumping up to hug me. "Daddy said you moved out. Are you coming back?" "No, sweetheart. I'm going to live somewhere else now." Her face fell. "But why? Did I do something wrong?" "Oh, honey, no, you didn't do anything wrong. Sometimes adults have to make difficult decisions about where they live. Is it because mommy's in jail? I looked at Marcus, who was standing in the doorway looking miserable. You told her? She heard me on the phone with the lawyer. I figured it was better to explain than to let her imagination run wild. I sat down at the table with Jasmine and chose my words carefully. Your mommy made some very bad choices, and now she has to face the consequences. That's how the world works for adults. Daddy said she stole money from you. Yes, she did. Are you mad at me because of what mommy did? My heart broke a little at the question. Jasmine, I could never be mad at you for something someone else did. You're not responsible for your mother's choices. But you're still leaving. Yes, I am. But not because of you. I'm leaving because I need to take care of myself and make my own life. She nodded solemnly, processing this information with the gravity that children bring to adult problems they don't fully understand. Will I still see you? I looked at Marcus again. He nodded slightly, giving me permission to make whatever promises I felt comfortable making. If you want to see me, and if your daddy says it's okay, then yes, we can have visits. Can I call you on the phone? Anytime you want. She seemed satisfied with this answer and went back to her homework. But as I was preparing to leave, she looked up again. Grandma Thelma? Are you proud of me for being good, even when everything is scary? The question hit me like a physical blow. This 8-year-old child was asking for validation, that she was handling her family's collapse with appropriate maturity. She was asking if she was being good enough to deserve love and stability. Jasmine, I said, kneeling down so I could look her in the eye, I am so proud of you. You are brave and smart and kind, and none of the adult problems in this house are your fault or your responsibility. You just keep being exactly who you are. She hugged me then, fierce and tight, and whispered, I love you, Grandma Thelma. I love you too, sweetheart. As I drove away from that house for what I knew would be the last time, I thought about the different kinds of family. There was the family you were born into or married into, the family that shared your blood or your name. And then there was the family you chose, the people who treated you with respect and kindness and honesty. I was done with the first kind of family. From now on, I was only interested in the second kind. 3 weeks later, Brielle pled guilty to elder abuse and theft charges in exchange for a reduced sentence. She would serve 18 months in prison, followed by 3 years of probation. She would also be required to pay full restitution for the money she'd stolen, though the prosecutor warned me that collecting from someone with no assets might be difficult. Marcus pled guilty to tax evasion and received 3 years of probation, a hefty fine, and an order to pay back taxes with penalties. His business was finished, but he'd avoided jail time and would be able to rebuild his life if he chose to. I testified at both proceedings, looking Brielle in the eye as I described what her actions had done to my life. She never apologized or showed any remorse. Even facing prison time, she maintained that she'd been justified in her actions. But I wasn't testifying for her benefit. I was testifying for mine, and for all the other elderly people who'd been victimized by family members they trusted. I was putting my story on the record so that the next person in my situation might have an easier time being believed. By the time the legal proceedings were finished, I'd found an apartment in Margaret's neighborhood and had started my volunteer work. I was busier than I'd been in years, and for the first time since my husband died, I felt like I was living my life rather than just existing. The apartment was small but comfortable, with a view of a park where I could watch children play and dog owners walk their pets. I filled it with my own furniture and photographs, arranged exactly the way I wanted them. No one could move my things or suggest that I needed different furniture for safety reasons. No one could comment on my decorating choices or imply that I was too old to live independently. It was mine, completely and utterly mine, in a way that nowhere had been since my husband died. I established new routines that revolved around my interests rather than other people's needs. I volunteered at the Elder Advocacy Office on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays. On Tuesdays and Thursdays, I worked at the hospital, helping families navigate the complexities of insurance and medical billing. On weekends, I did whatever I wanted: gardening, reading, visiting with Margaret, or simply sitting in my own living room enjoying the silence. The work I was doing felt important in a way that cooking dinner and doing laundry had never felt. I was helping people who were facing the same kinds of manipulation and abuse that I'd experienced. I was using my education and experience to make a real difference in people's lives. Patricia Chen told me I was one of the most effective advocates they'd ever had, because I could speak from personal experience about how sophisticated financial abuse could be. You understand the psychology of it, she said. You know how these predators work, how they isolate their victims and make them doubt their own perceptions. That's invaluable when we're trying to help someone who's been gaslit for months or years. I also discovered that I enjoyed the work in a way I hadn't enjoyed anything in years. Each case was a puzzle to be solved, a victim to be empowered, a predator to be stopped. It engaged parts of my mind that had been dormant during my years of domestic servitude. 6 months after Brielle was sentenced, I got a call from Marcus. Jasmine was having trouble in school, and the counselor had suggested that she might benefit from more contact with stable adult figures in her life. She asks about you all the time, he said. Would you consider having regular visits with her? I'd been expecting this call, and I'd thought carefully about my answer. Yes, but on my terms. She can visit me at my apartment, and you can drop her off and pick her up. I'm not coming back to that house. That's fair. And Marcus? If you ever lie to me again about anything, if you ever try to manipulate me, or use Jasmine to manipulate me, I'll disappear from your lives permanently. I'm done being anyone's victim. I understand. The visits with Jasmine became the highlight of my weeks. Every Saturday, Marcus would drop her off at my apartment, and we'd spend the day together. Sometimes we'd go to the park or the library. Sometimes we'd stay in and bake cookies, or work on craft projects. Always, we'd talk. Jasmine was resilient in the way that children can be, but she was also carrying burdens that no 8-year-old should have to carry. She worried about money constantly, asking if there was enough for groceries or if the electricity would be turned off. She asked careful questions about her mother's prison sentence and whether Brielle would be different when she got out. I don't think Mommy ever really liked me, she said one Saturday as we were planting flowers in pots for my balcony. She was always nicer to me when other people were watching. The observation was so perceptive it took my breath away. What makes you say that? When it was just us, she'd get mad about everything. Like, if I spilled something or couldn't find my shoes fast enough. But when Daddy was home or when we had company, she'd act like I was the most precious thing in the world. I thought about my own experience with Brielle's public versus private personas. Sometimes people pretend to be different than they really are. Yeah, but why would you pretend not to love your own kid? It was a question I couldn't answer without destroying what remained of an 8-year-old's faith in the world. So instead I said, I think some people don't know how to love properly. But that doesn't mean there's anything wrong with the people they should be loving. Do you think she'll be different when she gets out of jail? I don't know, sweetheart. But I do know that you're surrounded by people who love you the right way. Your daddy loves you and I love you and Margaret loves you. Promise you won't go away like Mommy did? I set down my gardening tools and looked at this beautiful, complicated child who'd been through more trauma in her 8 years than most adults face in a lifetime. Jasmine, I can't promise that nothing will ever separate us, because life is unpredictable, but I can promise that I will never choose to leave you. I will never stop loving you. And as long as I'm able, I will be here when you need me. It was the most honest promise I could make, and it seemed to satisfy her. She went back to planting flowers, humming a song I didn't recognize. As the months passed, my new life took on a rhythm and richness that surprised me. I was busier than I'd been in years, but it was the kind of busy that came from choosing my own activities rather than having them imposed on me. I joined a book club that met at the library every Tuesday evening. I started taking a watercolor painting class at the community center. I volunteered to teach basic financial literacy classes to other seniors who wanted to better understand their money. For the first time since my husband died, I felt like I was living rather than just surviving. I had friends who valued my opinions and sought my advice. I had work that engaged my mind and satisfied my soul. I had a granddaughter who looked forward to our time together and a living situation that was entirely under my control. The woman who had been humiliated in that nursing home hallway seemed like someone from another lifetime. That woman had been broken down by months of systematic abuse. convinced that she was losing her mind, isolated from anyone who might have helped her see the truth. This woman, the woman I'd become after fighting back, was stronger and more confident than I'd been in years. Maybe stronger than I'd ever been, because this strength had been tested and proven real. I thought about Brielle sometimes, wondering if prison was teaching her anything about the consequences of her choices. I thought about Marcus, struggling to rebuild his life and his relationship with his daughter after destroying both with his dishonesty. But mostly, I thought about the future, about the cases I was working on and the people I was helping, about Jasmine's next visit and the art project we'd planned, about the garden Margaret and I were designing for her backyard and the book club's next selection. I thought about all the things I wanted to do with the years I had left, all the ways I could make those years meaningful and productive. Brielle had tried to steal my money, my dignity, and my independence. She'd tried to convince everyone, including me, that I was a helpless old woman who needed to be managed rather than respected. She'd failed completely. The money was back in my control, protected by new safeguards, and managed according to my own priorities. My dignity had been restored by the justice system's recognition that what happened to me was criminal, not just unfortunate. And my independence? My independence was stronger than it had ever been, because now I knew exactly how much it was worth and exactly what I was willing to do to protect it. At 73 years old, I'd learned that it's never too late to start over. It's never too late to demand respect. And it's never too late to fight back against people who try to make you smaller than you are. Brielle thought she was punishing me by trying to destroy my life. Instead, she'd given me the greatest gift imaginable, the knowledge that I was strong enough to save myself. And that knowledge would carry me through whatever challenges lay ahead. The call came on a Tuesday evening in March, almost exactly 1 year after Brielle had been sentenced. I was in my kitchen making dinner when the phone rang, and I almost didn't answer it because I didn't recognize the number. Mrs. Bailey? This is Warden Patricia Collins from Riverside Correctional Facility. I'm calling about Brielle Bailey. My blood went cold. Is she hurt? No, ma'am, she's fine physically. But she's been asking to speak with you. She claims she has information about additional crimes that were committed against you, information that might help with restitution. I set down the wooden spoon I'd been using to stir my soup and leaned against the counter. What kind of information? She won't discuss it with anyone but you. I want to be clear, Mrs. Bailey, that you're under no obligation to visit or speak with her. But if there are additional assets that could be recovered for restitution, it might be worth considering. After I hung up, I sat at my kitchen table for a long time, watching the steam rise from my bowl of soup and thinking about whether I wanted to see Brielle again. Part of me was curious about what information she claimed to have, but a larger part of me wondered if this was just another manipulation, another attempt to insert herself back into my life. I called Patricia Chen the next morning and explained the situation. It could be legitimate, she said. Sometimes inmates realize they're facing consequences that won't go away, and they decide to come clean about things they held back during the original investigation. But it could also be a manipulation tactic. What would you advise? If you decide to go, don't go alone. Bring an attorney or an advocate with you. And don't let her steer the conversation. You control what gets discussed and for how long. I thought about it for 3 days before making my decision. Finally, I called the prison and arranged a visit for the following week. I also called Detective Morrison and asked if he wanted to be present for whatever Brielle had to say. Absolutely, he said. If she's got information about additional crimes, I want to hear it firsthand. The prison was exactly what I'd expected. Gray concrete walls, multiple security checkpoints, and the smell of industrial disinfectant everywhere. Detective Morrison met me in the parking lot, and we went through the visitor processing together. Just remember, he said as we waited to be called back, you don't owe her anything. If she tries to play mind games or make you feel guilty, we can end this visit immediately. When they brought Brielle into the visiting room, I was shocked by how much she'd changed. She'd lost at least 20 pounds, her hair was shorter and grayer, and there were lines around her eyes that hadn't been there before. Prison had aged her in ways that made her look older than her actual 42 years. She sat down across from us, her hands folded on the metal table, and for a moment none of us spoke. "Thank you for coming," she said finally, her voice quieter than I remembered. "I wasn't sure you would. I'm here because the warden said you have information about additional crimes." "What information?" She looked at Detective Morrison, then back at me. "There's money you don't know about. Money I took that wasn't included in the original charges." "How much money?" "About $15,000. Maybe more." Detective Morrison leaned forward. "Where did this money come from?" "Different places. I was skimming cash from Marcus's business and depositing it into an account Thelma didn't know about. I also sold some of her jewelry and kept the money." I felt my stomach drop. "What jewelry?" "Your wedding ring. The pearl necklace your mother left you. Some other pieces from your jewelry box. The wedding ring. I'd been looking for it for months, thinking I'd misplaced it during the chaos of moving out." "Where did you sell them?" "Various pawn shops around town. I kept the receipts in case I ever needed to buy them back, but I never planned to." Detective Morrison was taking notes. "Where are these receipts now?" "Hidden in my sister Denise's attic. She doesn't know they're there. I hid them in a box of old Christmas decorations the last time I visited her." "And the bank account with the stolen money?" "Community First Credit Union. The account is under the name B.C. Bailey. I used my maiden name so it wouldn't be connected to Marcus." I stared at this woman who had systematically stripped away pieces of my life while pretending to care about my welfare. "Why didn't you tell anyone about this during the investigation?" For the first time, since she'd sat down, Brielle looked genuinely uncomfortable. "Because I thought I might beat the charges. I thought if I could convince everyone that you really were incompetent, I could claim I was just managing your money for your own good. But when that didn't work, you decided to hold on to this information as leverage?" "I guess. I don't know. I wasn't thinking clearly." Detective Morrison set down his pen and looked at her directly. "What do you want in exchange for this information?" "I want to write a letter to Jasmine. A real letter, explaining what I did and why it was wrong. I want her to hear from me that none of this was her fault." I felt my anger flare. "You think you can buy your way back into your daughter's life by returning jewelry you never should have stolen in the first place?" "No," she said quickly. "I know I can't fix what I've done to her. But she deserves to hear from me that I take responsibility for my choices. She deserves to know that her mother isn't just a victim of circumstances. She deserves a lot of things she's not going to get because of what you did." Brielle nodded, tears starting to form in her eyes. I know I destroyed my family. I know I hurt people who trusted me. I know I can't undo any of it. Then why this sudden attack of conscience? Because I've had a year to think about what I did. A year to live with the consequences. A year to realize that everything I told myself to justify stealing from you was just lies I made up so I could sleep at night." I studied her face, looking for signs of manipulation or performance, but she looked genuinely broken in a way that was hard to fake. "The letter to Jasmine," I said. "What would you want to say to her?" "That I'm sorry, that she didn't do anything wrong, that the problems in our family were caused by my choices, not by anything she did or didn't do, that she deserves love and stability and honesty, and I failed to give her those things." Detective Morrison was watching this exchange with professional interest. "Mrs. Bailey, what do you think?" I thought about Jasmine, who still asked careful questions about her mother, and still worried that somehow she was responsible for her family's destruction. I thought about the wedding ring that had belonged to my mother before me, the ring that symbolized 60 years of marriage and commitment. "I want the jewelry back," I said. "I want the money returned with interest. And I want the letter to Jasmine reviewed by a child psychologist before it's sent." "Agreed," Brielle said immediately. "And this doesn't change anything between us. This doesn't earn you forgiveness or a relationship with me. This is just you returning things you stole and taking responsibility for additional crimes you committed." "I understand." Detective Morrison closed his notebook. "I'll need detailed information about the pawn shops, the bank account, and the location of the receipts. We'll also need you to sign a written statement acknowledging these additional thefts." Whatever you need." As we prepared to leave, Brielle looked at me one more time. "Thelma, I know you'll probably never believe this, but I am sorry. Not just sorry I got caught, but sorry for what I did to you. You didn't deserve any of it." I stood up and looked down at this woman who had tried so hard to destroy my life. "You're right, I don't believe you, but I hope for Jasmine's sake that you mean it." 2 weeks later, Detective Morrison called to tell me they'd recovered everything Brielle had described. The jewelry had been found at 3 different pawn shops, and the bank account had contained just over $16,000. The receipts had been exactly where she'd said they would be, hidden in her sister's attic. Her sister had no idea, he said. She was horrified when we told her what Brielle had been hiding in her house. The jewelry was returned to me in a small manila envelope that felt heavier than it should have. When I opened it alone in my apartment, I cried for the first time since this whole ordeal had begun. Not from sadness, but from relief at having these pieces of my history back. My wedding ring slipped onto my finger like it had never been gone. The pearl necklace that had been my mother's lay cool and familiar against my palm. Even the small sapphire earrings my husband had given me for our 25th anniversary were there, safe and undamaged. The money was deposited back into my accounts with interest and penalties that Brielle would be responsible for paying. It wouldn't be easy for her to earn that kind of money from prison, but that was her problem to solve. The letter to Jasmine took longer to resolve. The child psychologist who reviewed it suggested several changes to make the language more appropriate for an 8-year-old. Brielle agreed to all the revisions without argument. When the final version was approved, I was the one who gave it to Jasmine during one of our Saturday visits. I sat with her while she read it, watching her face carefully for signs of distress. The letter was simple and direct. Brielle took full responsibility for her actions, assured Jasmine that none of the family's problems were her fault, and expressed hope that Jasmine would grow up to be honest and kind. She didn't ask for forgiveness or promise to be a better mother when she got out. She just acknowledged the damage she'd done and encouraged Jasmine to trust the adults who were taking care of her now. "Do you think she means it?" Jasmine asked when she finished reading. "I think she's trying to do the right thing now, even though she did a lot of wrong things before. Should I write her back?" I'd been dreading this question. "That's up to you and your daddy. But you don't have to decide right now. You can think about it for as long as you need to." "I don't think I want to write her back yet. Maybe someday, but not yet." "That's perfectly okay. You get to decide when and if you're ready for that." She folded the letter carefully and put it in her backpack. "Grandma Thelma, do you think I'll be like her when I grow up?" "What do you mean? Do you think I'll make bad choices like she did? Do you think I'll hurt people I'm supposed to love?" I pulled her onto my lap, this growing girl who was already too big for such gestures but who still needed them sometimes. "Jasmine, you are not your mother. You get to choose who you become. And from what I can see, you're choosing to be kind and thoughtful and honest. Those are good choices. But how do I know for sure? How do I know I won't change and become mean?" "Because you're asking these questions. Mean people don't worry about becoming mean. They just act mean and make excuses for it. The fact that you're thinking about what kind of person you want to be tells me you're going to be just fine." That conversation stayed with me long after Jasmine went home with Marcus. I realized that one of the most insidious effects of Brielle's crimes was the way they'd made everyone question themselves. Marcus questioned his judgment and his ability to protect his family. Jasmine questioned whether she was somehow fundamentally flawed. And I had questioned my own competence and worth. But questioning ourselves isn't always a bad thing, especially when it leads to growth and better choices. The key is distinguishing between healthy self-reflection and the kind of destructive self-doubt that manipulative people use to control their victims. 6 months later, I received unexpected news that changed everything once again. Patricia Chen called me at home on a Friday evening, her voice unusually excited. "Thelma, I have an opportunity I want to discuss with you. The state is creating a new position for a senior victim advocate, someone who would work directly with law enforcement and the court system to support elderly victims of financial abuse." "What kind of position?" "It's a paid position, not volunteer work. You'd be working with district attorneys to help them understand the complexities of elder abuse cases. You'd also be working directly with victims to help them navigate the legal system and access resources. I set down the book I'd been reading and gave her my full attention. Are you suggesting I apply for this position? I'm suggesting you'd be perfect for it. You have the experience, the professional background, and the communication skills they're looking for. Plus, you've already proven that you can work effectively with law enforcement and legal professionals. The idea intrigued me more than I expected. Since beginning my volunteer work, I discovered that I had a talent for explaining complex financial concepts in ways that non-experts could understand. I'd also learned that I could speak publicly about my experience without falling apart, which was valuable when testifying in court or presenting to community groups. What would the job involve specifically? Case consultation, victim support, community education, and policy development. You'd be helping to create protocols for how these cases are investigated and prosecuted. It's a chance to influence systemic change, not just help individual victims. When do they need an answer? Applications are due in 2 weeks. But Thelma, I've already spoken with the hiring committee informally. They're very interested in interviewing you. After we hung up, I sat in my living room thinking about this unexpected opportunity. At 74 years old, was I ready to start a new career? Did I have the energy and stamina for a demanding job that would require travel and public speaking? More importantly, did I want to spend my remaining working years focused on the kind of abuse I'd experienced? Would it be healing to help other victims, or would it be re-traumatizing to constantly revisit the worst period of my life? I called Margaret and asked if she could come over to help me think through the decision. She arrived within an hour, carrying a bottle of wine and her practical wisdom. "What's holding you back?" she asked after I'd explained the opportunity. "I'm not sure. Maybe I'm afraid I'm not qualified enough. Maybe I'm afraid I am qualified enough and this job will take over my life. Or maybe you're afraid that if you make elder abuse your profession, you'll become defined by what happened to you instead of by who you are." That was exactly what I was afraid of, though I hadn't been able to articulate it myself. I don't want to become the poster child for elder abuse victims. Then don't. Apply for the job because you're qualified and because you can make a difference. Not because you're a victim, but because you're a survivor who chose to fight back. We talked until late that night, weighing the pros and cons, discussing what the job might mean for my relationship with Jasmine and my other commitments. By the time Margaret went home, I'd made my decision. I spent the next 2 weeks preparing my application with the same methodical approach I'd used to build my case against Brielle. I documented my professional experience, my volunteer work, and my personal knowledge of financial abuse tactics. I requested letters of recommendation from Patricia Chen, Detective Morrison, and the district attorney who had prosecuted Brielle. The interview process was more rigorous than I'd expected. I met with a panel that included representatives from the State Attorney General's office, the Department of Aging Services, and local law enforcement. They asked detailed questions about my experience, my approach to victim advocacy, and my ideas for improving the system. "Mrs. Bailey," one of the interviewers said, "you've been through a traumatic experience that could have left you bitter or withdrawn. Instead, you've chosen to use that experience to help others. What drives that choice?" I thought carefully before answering. I think trauma gives you 2 options. You can let it make you smaller, or you can let it make you stronger. For a while, I let it make me smaller. I doubted myself and my perceptions. I became passive and accommodating to avoid conflict. But eventually, I realized that being small doesn't protect you from predators. It just makes you easier prey. And now I know that the best protection against future victimization is education, preparation, and a support system of people who respect your autonomy. I want to help create that kind of protection for other people. 2 weeks later, I received a call offering me the position. The salary was more than I'd earned as a bank manager, and the benefits package included health insurance and a retirement contribution. It was an opportunity to build financial security while doing meaningful work. But more than that, it was validation that my experience had value beyond just my own healing. It was confirmation that I could take the worst thing that had ever happened to me and transform it into something that helped other people. I accepted the position and started work the following month. My first case was a 90-year-old man whose grandson had been using his credit cards to fund a gambling addiction. My second case involved a widow whose neighbor had convinced her to sign over her house in exchange for lifetime care that never materialized. Each case was different, but the patterns were remarkably similar. Isolation, gradual escalation of control, exploitation of trust, and systematic erosion of the victim's confidence in their own judgment. The tactics Brielle had used on me were being used on vulnerable elderly people all across the state. But I also discovered that when victims had proper support and advocacy, they were often stronger and more resilient than anyone expected. They just needed someone to believe them, someone to explain their options, and someone to help them navigate systems that weren't designed with elderly victims in mind. The work was demanding but satisfying in ways I hadn't anticipated. I was traveling throughout the state, training law enforcement officers on the signs of financial abuse. I was working with prosecutors to help them understand the psychological tactics used by family members who prey on elderly relatives. I was developing educational materials for seniors to help them protect themselves from manipulation. Most importantly, I was helping individual victims reclaim their lives and their dignity. I was showing them that being victimized didn't make them weak or stupid. It just made them human. 6 months into the job, I received a call that brought my two worlds together in an unexpected way. Detective Morrison called to tell me that Brielle was being released from prison early for good behavior. "She'll be on supervised probation for the remainder of her sentence," he said. "But I thought you should know she'll be back in the community. Is she planning to contact me or my family?" "Not according to her probation officer. She's actually moving to another state to live with her sister. Apparently she wants a fresh start away from the people she hurt." The news didn't upset me as much as I thought it would. Brielle had become more of an abstract concept than a real threat in my mind. I'd moved beyond fearing her to simply not thinking about her much at all. But I did think about Jasmine, who would soon face the possibility of renewed contact with her mother. When I saw her that weekend, I brought up the subject carefully. "Your mom is getting out of prison soon," I said as we worked on a puzzle together. "How do you feel about that?" She was quiet for a long time, concentrating on fitting a piece into place. "I don't know," she said finally. "I guess I'm glad she's not in jail anymore, but I don't really want to see her yet." "That's perfectly okay. You don't have to see her until you're ready, if you ever are." "Daddy said she's moving far away." "That's what I heard too. Do you think that's better?" I considered the question carefully. I think it gives everyone time to heal and grow without having to deal with complicated relationships. Sometimes distance is the kindest thing for everyone involved. "Will you still be here if I ever want to talk about her?" "Always," I promised. "No matter what happens with your mom, I'll always be here when you need me." A year later, I was invited to speak at a national conference on elder abuse prevention. The audience included law enforcement officers, social workers, healthcare professionals, and other advocates from across the country. I told my story not as a victim seeking sympathy, but as a professional sharing insights about how these crimes work and how they can be stopped. During the question and answer session, a young social worker asked me about forgiveness. "Do you think it's important for victims to forgive their abusers as part of the healing process?" "I think forgiveness is a personal choice that victims should never be pressured to make," I answered. "Healing doesn't require forgiveness. It requires reclaiming your power, rebuilding your life, and refusing to let someone else's crimes define your future." "But don't you carry anger if you don't forgive?" "I carry knowledge. I carry strength. I carry determination to prevent other people from experiencing what I experienced. If that includes some anger, then so be it. Anger can be motivating as long as it doesn't become consuming." After the conference, several attendees approached me to share their own experiences or to ask for advice about cases they were working on. I realized that my story had become more than just personal testimony. It had become a teaching tool, a way to help other professionals understand the psychological dynamics of family-perpetrated elder abuse. On the flight home, I thought about how dramatically my life had changed in the 3 years since Brielle had first forced me to wear those adult diapers. That humiliated, confused woman seemed like someone from another lifetime. She'd been replaced by someone confident, purposeful, and unafraid to speak truth to power. The transformation hadn't happened overnight, and it hadn't been easy. There had been moments of doubt, setbacks, and loneliness. There had been nights when I questioned whether fighting back had been worth the cost to my relationship with Marcus and the upheaval in Jasmine's life. But sitting on that airplane, returning home to a job I loved and a life I'd built entirely on my own terms, I knew I'd made the right choices. I'd chosen truth over peace, justice over accommodation, dignity over family harmony, and those choices had led me to a life that was richer and more meaningful than anything I'd had before Brielle tried to destroy me. When I got home, there was a letter waiting from Jasmine. She was now 10 years old and had started writing to me between our visits. This letter was different from her usual updates about school and friends. "Dear Grandma Thelma," it read, "I've been thinking about what you told me about choosing who I want to be. I decided I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to help people who are being hurt by other people. I want to be brave and strong, and not let anyone make me feel small. Thank you for showing me that it's possible to fight back when someone tries to hurt you. Love, Jasmine." I read the letter 3 times, tears streaming down my face. Not tears of sadness, but tears of pride and hope. This little girl, who had witnessed the destruction of her family and the near destruction of mine, had chosen to see strength rather than victimhood as her model for the future. She'd chosen to see fighting back as an option rather than accepting abuse as inevitable. She'd chosen to believe that people could overcome terrible circumstances and build something better from the wreckage. I sat down at my kitchen table and wrote her back immediately. "Dear Jasmine," I began, "you can be anything you want to be when you grow up. If you choose to help people, you'll be wonderful at it because you understand what it feels like to need help. If you choose to be brave, you'll succeed because you've already shown more courage in your 10 years than most adults show in their entire lives. And if you choose to fight back against injustice, you'll make the world a better place for everyone. But most importantly, you should choose these things because they matter to you, not because you want to be like anyone else. You're already perfect exactly as you are. Love, Grandma Thelma." As I sealed the envelope, I thought about the legacy I wanted to leave behind. Not just the money in my bank accounts or the possessions in my apartment, but the example of how to respond when life tries to break you. Brielle had tried to steal more than my money. She'd tried to steal my autonomy, my dignity, and my sense of self-worth. She'd tried to convince everyone, including me, that I was worthless and expendable. She'd failed completely. Instead of destroying me, she'd revealed strengths I didn't know I possessed. Instead of making me weaker, she'd forced me to become stronger. Instead of ending my useful life, she'd launched me into the most meaningful chapter I'd ever experienced. The woman who'd been humiliated in that nursing home hallway was gone forever. In her place was someone who refused to be diminished, someone who fought for justice, someone who turned her own trauma into a tool for helping others. Brielle had intended to punish me by taking away everything I valued. Instead, she'd given me something invaluable: the knowledge that I was capable of surviving anything and emerging stronger on the other side. That knowledge would carry me through whatever challenges lay ahead. And it would be the most important lesson I could pass on to Jasmine and to all the other victims I would help in the years to come. Sometimes the best revenge isn't revenge at all. Sometimes it's simply refusing to let someone else's cruelty define your future. Sometimes it's choosing to build something beautiful from the ruins of what they tried to destroy. And sometimes, if you're very lucky, it's discovering that the person you become after surviving the worst thing that ever happened to you is stronger, wiser, and more purposeful than the person you were before. 5 years had passed since I'd started my position as senior victim advocate, and I was preparing for what I knew would be my final case before retirement. At 79, I'd reached the point where I wanted to step back from the demanding travel schedule and focus on training the next generation of advocates. But this particular case had captured my attention in a way that made me want to see it through personally. The victim was an 82-year-old woman named Dorothy Chen, whose daughter-in-law had been systematically draining her accounts while convincing the family that Dorothy was developing dementia. The parallels to my own experience were striking, but what made this case unique was that Dorothy's granddaughter had been the one to report the abuse. 16-year-old Amy Chen had noticed discrepancies in her grandmother's financial statements and had done her own investigation before contacting Adult Protective Services. She reminded me so much of Jasmine, who was now 15 and had indeed chosen to pursue her interest in helping others by volunteering at a local victim advocacy center. I drove to the Chen family's home on a crisp October morning, accompanied by Detective Sarah Walsh, who had been my primary law enforcement contact for the past 3 years. The house was a modest ranch-style home in an older neighborhood, with a well-maintained garden that showed signs of Dorothy's careful attention. Amy met us at the door, a petite girl with serious dark eyes and an air of maturity that seemed beyond her years. She led us into a living room where Dorothy was sitting in a recliner, looking alert and engaged despite her advanced age. "Mrs. Chen," I said, settling into the chair across from her. "I'm Thelma Bailey, and I'm here to help you sort through what's been happening with your finances." Dorothy's relief was palpable. "Thank you for coming. Amy keeps telling me I'm not crazy, but everyone else acts like I can't understand what's happening to my own money. Tell me what you've noticed." "Well, I've always been very careful with my finances. I balanced my checkbook every month, paid my bills on time, never overdrew my account. But lately, Linda, that's my daughter-in-law, she keeps telling me I'm getting confused about money." Amy interrupted. "Grandma, show her the bank statements." Dorothy reached for a manila folder on the side table. "Linda brings me these statements every month and points out transactions she says I made but don't remember. Cash withdrawals, transfers to accounts I've never heard of, payments to companies I don't recognize." I examined the statements carefully, noting the same patterns I'd seen in dozens of similar cases. Large cash withdrawals made during business hours when Dorothy would typically be at her weekly senior center activities. Transfers to accounts with similar but slightly different names. Payments to services that elderly people rarely used. "Mrs. Chen, do you ever make cash withdrawals of $500 or more?" "Never. I use my debit card for small purchases, but I've never needed that much cash at once. And these transfer payments to El Chen Financial Management? I have no idea what that is. Linda told me it was some kind of automatic savings plan I'd signed up for, but I don't remember doing that." Detective Walsh looked up from her notes. "Amy, you mentioned you found evidence of forged documents?" Amy nodded and pulled out a tablet. "I started taking pictures of things when I noticed Grandma was getting upset about money. Look at this." She showed us a photograph of a power of attorney document that had allegedly been signed by Dorothy. The signature looked similar to Dorothy's usual signature, but there were subtle differences in the letter formation that suggested forgery. "I compared it to signatures on birthday cards Grandma had sent me over the years," Amy explained. "The D in Dorothy is completely different, and she always makes this little flourish on the Y that's missing here." I was impressed by Amy's attention to detail and her initiative in documenting the evidence. "What made you first suspect something was wrong?" Grandma started getting really anxious about money, which wasn't like her at all. She'd always been so confident about her finances. Then Linda started talking about how Grandma might need to move to an assisted living facility because she was getting, quote, financially irresponsible. Dorothy's face hardened. "Linda keeps saying I'm not competent to live alone anymore. She's been pressuring my son Robert to have me evaluated for dementia. But your son hasn't seen any signs of cognitive decline? Robert works long hours and travels a lot for his job. He mostly hears about my supposed problems secondhand from Linda. It was a familiar pattern. The primary caregiver, often a daughter-in-law, gradually isolates the elderly person from other family members, while establishing themselves as the sole source of information about the victim's condition." Detective Walsh asked, "Have you had any recent medical evaluations?" "My doctor says I'm sharp as a tack, but Linda keeps insisting I need to see a specialist who understands elderly cognitive issues better." I pulled out my phone and called Dr. Martinez, who had remained my physician and had become an expert witness in several elder abuse cases over the years. After explaining the situation, I handed the phone to Dorothy. "Dr. Martinez would like to schedule you for a comprehensive cognitive evaluation today, if you're willing. This will give us documentation of your mental state that can't be dismissed or questioned." Dorothy agreed immediately, and we arranged to meet at Dr. Martinez's office that afternoon. Before we left, I asked Amy to show me any other evidence she'd collected. The teenager had been thorough in a way that impressed even Detective Walsh. She'd photographed bank statements, documented conversations she'd overheard between her parents, and even recorded a phone call where Linda had tried to convince Robert that Dorothy was losing her grip on reality. "Amy," I said, "have you considered a career in law enforcement or victim advocacy?" She smiled for the first time since we'd arrived. "Actually, yes. There's a girl at school whose grandmother went through something similar, and I've been thinking about how to help families recognize these warning signs earlier." The evaluation with Dr. Martinez confirmed what I'd suspected. Dorothy scored in the normal range on all cognitive tests and showed no signs of dementia or other conditions that would impair her judgment. Dr. Martinez provided us with a detailed written assessment that would be crucial evidence in any legal proceedings. Armed with this documentation, Detective Walsh and I met with the district attorney's office the next day to discuss charges against Linda Chen. The prosecutor assigned to the case was Maria Santos, a young attorney who had been trained in elder abuse cases and understood the complexities involved. "The evidence is strong," Maria said after reviewing our file. "The forged power of attorney alone is enough for criminal charges. The financial abuse adds multiple felonies. But I'm concerned about the family dynamics. The victim's son is married to the perpetrator, and they have children together." "That's often the case in these situations," I replied. "But the victim's welfare has to take priority over family harmony." "Agreed. I'm also concerned about retaliation against the granddaughter who reported this. We need to make sure Amy is protected throughout the process." Detective Walsh nodded. "We've already discussed that with the family. Amy's parents are supportive of the investigation, and they understand that Linda's actions were criminal regardless of her relationship to the family." 3 days later, Linda Chen was arrested at her workplace on charges of elder abuse, forgery, and theft. The arrest was deliberately timed to minimize drama for the family, but Linda's reaction was explosive. She immediately claimed that Dorothy was suffering from dementia and that Amy was a troubled teenager trying to cause problems for the family. She insisted that she had been managing Dorothy's finances with proper authorization, and that any irregularities were due to Dorothy's confusion about her own transactions. But Linda had made the same mistake that Brielle had made years earlier. She'd been so focused on manipulating perceptions that she'd been careless about documentation. The forged power of attorney was easily proven false through handwriting analysis. The secret bank accounts were clearly fraudulent. And Dorothy's cognitive evaluation provided irrefutable evidence of her competence. The preliminary hearing was scheduled for 2 weeks later, and I spent that time preparing Dorothy for the experience of testifying against her daughter-in-law. These cases were always emotionally difficult for victims, who often struggled with guilt about the impact on their families. "Dorothy," I said during one of our preparation sessions, "I want you to remember that you didn't cause this situation. Linda made choices that were illegal and harmful. Holding her accountable for those choices isn't something you're doing to her. It's something she did to herself. But what about Robert? What about my grandchildren? This is going to destroy their family. Linda destroyed their family when she decided to steal from you. You're just making sure there are consequences for that destruction." Dorothy nodded, but I could see the weight of the decision in her eyes. It was the same weight I'd carried when I'd made the choice to fight back against Brielle. The hearing went smoothly, with Dorothy testifying clearly and confidently about her financial management practices and her lack of awareness about the fraudulent transactions. Amy testified about her investigation and the evidence she'd collected. Dr. Martinez presented his cognitive evaluation results. Linda's attorney tried to argue that the family dynamics were too complex for criminal prosecution, that this was a civil matter that should be resolved privately. But Judge Harrison, who had presided over several elder abuse cases, was having none of it. "Theft is theft," he said during his ruling. "The relationship between the perpetrator and victim doesn't change the criminal nature of the acts. The defendant will be bound over for trial on all charges." As we left the courthouse, Dorothy squeezed my hand. "Thank you for believing me. Thank you for helping me understand that I wasn't going crazy." "You were never going crazy," I assured her. "You were being deliberately confused by someone who had their own agenda." 6 months later, Linda Chen pled guilty to all charges and was sentenced to 2 years in prison plus 5 years of probation. She was also ordered to pay full restitution, which amounted to nearly $40,000. The judge made it clear that any future contact with Dorothy would be considered a violation of the restraining order that had been put in place. But perhaps the most satisfying outcome was watching Amy's growth throughout the process. The teenager had not only helped save her grandmother from further abuse, but had also discovered her own passion for advocacy work. She'd started a peer education program at her high school to teach other teenagers about recognizing signs of elder abuse in their families. "Mrs. Bailey," Amy said to me after Linda's sentencing, "I've been accepted to the University of Southern California for their criminology program. I want to specialize in elder abuse cases." "That's wonderful, Amy. The field needs more people like you." "I've been thinking about something you said during the investigation. You said that sometimes the best way to heal from trauma is to use that experience to help other people. Do you feel traumatized by what happened with your grandmother?" "Not traumatized exactly, but angry. Angry that someone could target an elderly person like that. Angry that it took a teenager to catch what the adults should have noticed. Angry that this probably happens to families all the time and nobody talks about it. Channel that anger into action," I advised. "Let it motivate you to make the system better." As I drove home from Amy's graduation party later that spring, I reflected on how this case had brought my career full circle. I'd started my advocacy work as a victim seeking justice. Now I was ending it as a mentor, helping the next generation of advocates develop their skills and passion. The retirement party that my colleagues threw for me was held at the community center, where I'd first started volunteering years earlier. Patricia Chen, now the director of a statewide elder advocacy network, gave a speech about the impact I'd had on the field. "Thelma Bailey didn't just recover from elder abuse," she said. "She transformed her experience into a force for systemic change. She's helped train hundreds of law enforcement officers, testified in dozens of cases, and mentored countless victims through their own recovery processes. But most importantly, she's shown all of us that age is not a limitation on making a difference in the world." As I looked around the room at the faces of people I'd worked with over the years, I felt a deep sense of satisfaction. This work had given me purpose and meaning in ways I'd never expected. It had also given me a community of people who respected my expertise and valued my contributions. After the party, Jasmine, now 20 and a junior in college studying social work, drove me home. She'd grown into a thoughtful, confident young woman who was indeed pursuing her childhood dream of helping people in crisis. "Grandma Thelma," she said as we sat in my apartment sharing leftover cake, "I've been thinking about writing my senior thesis about intergenerational trauma and resilience. Would you be willing to let me interview you about your experience?" "What kind of interview?" "I want to explore how surviving abuse can either perpetuate cycles of trauma or break them. Your story is an example of someone who chose to break the cycle by turning their experience into advocacy work." I considered her request carefully. Over the years, I'd told my story countless times in professional settings, but I'd rarely discussed the emotional journey of recovery with anyone, even Jasmine. "What would you want to know?" "How you decided to fight back instead of just trying to forget what happened. How you rebuilt your sense of self-worth after someone tried to destroy it. How you found the strength to help other people when you were still healing from your own trauma." Those are complex questions with complex answers. I know, but I think your answers could help other people who are facing similar situations. We scheduled several interview sessions over the following weeks. Talking with Jasmine about my experience was different from testifying in court or training professionals. With her, I could explore the emotional aspects of recovery that I rarely discussed publicly. The hardest part, I told her during one session, wasn't the financial abuse or even the drugging. It was the way Brielle made me doubt my own perceptions. She was so skilled at making me feel like I was losing my mind that I started to believe her. "How did you overcome that?" "Documentation. I started writing down everything that happened, every conversation, every incident that seemed strange. When I could see patterns on paper, I couldn't dismiss them as confusion or forgetfulness. And the decision to fight back legally, instead of just leaving? That took longer. At first, I just wanted to escape and rebuild my life somewhere safe. But then I realized that letting her get away with it would just enable her to victimize someone else. Jasmine was quiet for a moment. Do you think Mom would have stopped if you hadn't reported her? It was the first time she'd asked me directly about Brielle's motivations and future behavior. No, I said honestly. I think she would have escalated until she'd taken everything I had, and then she would have moved on to the next vulnerable person. Do you ever wonder what would have happened if Dad had believed you earlier? Sometimes, but I've learned that it's not productive to dwell on what-if scenarios. The important thing is that we both learned from the experience and made different choices going forward. Dad never talks about that time period. That's his way of coping. Some people process trauma by talking about it, others by moving past it. Neither approach is wrong. How do you process it? By using it. Every time I help another victim, every time I train a police officer to recognize signs of abuse, every time I testify in court, I'm taking something terrible that happened to me and making it meaningful. Jasmine's thesis turned out to be a sophisticated analysis of how trauma survivors can become agents of social change. She interviewed several other advocates and researchers, but my story served as a central case study for what she called transformative resilience. Your generation of advocates, she wrote in her conclusion, has created pathways for healing that didn't exist before. You've shown that victimization doesn't have to be a permanent identity, that trauma can be transformed into expertise, and that individual recovery can become collective empowerment. Reading her thesis, I felt proud not just of her academic achievement, but of the way she'd understood and articulated something I'd never been able to explain clearly myself. I had indeed transformed my trauma into expertise, and that transformation had been the key to my own healing. On my 80th birthday, Margaret threw me a small party with a guest list that represented the different chapters of my life. There were colleagues from my advocacy work, friends from my various volunteer activities, neighbors from my apartment building, and, of course, Jasmine and Marcus. Marcus and I had rebuilt our relationship slowly over the years, based on honesty and mutual respect, rather than obligation and guilt. He'd remarried a woman named Sarah, who treated both Jasmine and me with genuine warmth and respect. His landscaping business had recovered, and he'd become scrupulously honest about his financial practices. "Mom," he said to me as the party was winding down, "I want you to know that I'm proud of what you've accomplished. I'm also sorry it took me so long to really see who you are." "What do you see now?" "I see someone who's stronger and more capable than I ever gave you credit for. I see someone who turned the worst experience of her life into a force for good. I see someone I'm honored to call my mother." It was the kind of acknowledgement I'd been waiting years to hear from him. Not an apology for past mistakes, but recognition of who I'd become despite those mistakes. As the guests left and I cleaned up the remnants of the celebration, I thought about the journey that had brought me to this point. 8 years earlier, I'd been a broken woman who felt invisible and powerless. Now I was someone whose voice was heard, whose expertise was valued, and whose life had made a measurable difference in the world. The transformation hadn't been easy or quick. There had been setbacks, moments of doubt, and times when I'd questioned whether fighting back had been worth the cost. But sitting in my comfortable apartment, surrounded by cards and gifts from people who respected and cared about me, I knew I'd made the right choices. The next morning, I received a call that brought my story full circle in an unexpected way. Detective Morrison, who had retired several years earlier, called to tell me that Brielle had been arrested again, this time in Arizona, for attempting to defraud an elderly man she'd befriended at a seniors center. She used the same tactics, he said, gradually convinced him he was having memory problems, offered to help manage his finances, then started transferring money to accounts she controlled. How was she caught? The man's daughter noticed irregularities and called the police. When they investigated, they found your case in the database and realized they were dealing with a repeat offender. What happens now? She's facing enhanced charges as a repeat offender. With her previous conviction and this new case, she's looking at significant prison time. After we hung up, I felt a mixture of vindication and sadness. Vindication, because my decision to prosecute her had created a record that helped protect future victims. Sadness, because she'd clearly learned nothing from her previous consequences and had continued to prey on vulnerable elderly people. But mostly, I felt grateful. Grateful that I'd found the strength to fight back when she tried to destroy me. Grateful that my experience had been transformed into expertise that helped other people. Grateful that I'd lived long enough to see the impact of those choices. That afternoon, I called Amy Chen, who was now a senior at USC and preparing for graduate school. She'd stayed in touch over the years, updating me on her studies and seeking advice about her future career plans. "Amy," I said when she answered, "I have news about an old case that might interest you." After I told her about Brielle's latest arrest, Amy was quiet for a moment. "It validates everything we've learned about these predators, doesn't it? They don't stop unless they're stopped." "Exactly, which is why the work you're planning to do is so important." "Mrs. Bailey, I've been accepted to the master's program in criminology at John Jay. I'm going to specialize in financial crimes against the elderly." "That's wonderful news, Amy. I was wondering if you'd be willing to be a reference for my doctoral program applications. I want to continue this work at the research level, to help develop better prevention and intervention strategies." "I'd be honored." As evening fell, I sat on my balcony watching the sunset and thinking about legacy. Not the legacy of money or possessions, but the legacy of impact and influence. The work I'd done, the people I'd helped, the systems I'd helped change, would continue long after I was gone. Jasmine was entering a career in social work with a deep understanding of how trauma could be transformed into advocacy. Amy was pursuing advanced degrees that would allow her to research and prevent elder abuse on a larger scale. Dozens of other advocates I'd trained or mentored were carrying forward the work of protecting vulnerable elderly people. The ripple effects of my decision to fight back against Brielle had spread far beyond my own recovery. They'd created waves of change that would protect people I'd never meet, in situations I'd never know about. That was the true victory. Not just that I'd survived and thrived after abuse, but that my survival had made it easier for others to survive and thrive as well. As I prepared for bed that night, I looked at the framed photograph on my nightstand. It was a picture of me at a recent advocacy conference, standing at a podium addressing an audience of law enforcement officers and social workers. In the photo, I looked confident, authoritative, and completely at ease in my role as an expert. It was hard to reconcile that woman with the confused, frightened person who had stood in that nursing home hallway 8 years earlier, humiliated by a daughter-in-law who thought she could erase me from existence. But they were the same person, separated only by choices and time. The woman in the nursing home had chosen to fight back instead of giving up. She'd chosen truth over convenience, justice over peace, dignity over family harmony. And those choices had led, step by step, to the woman in the photograph. Someone who had not only recovered from abuse, but had transformed that experience into a lifetime of meaningful work. The next morning brought news that my autobiography, written with the help of a professional writer and published by a university press, had been selected for a National Book Award for advocacy writing. The book, titled Fighting Back: An Elder's Journey from Victim to Advocate, was being used in college courses and professional training programs across the country. The recognition was gratifying, but more important was the feedback I'd been receiving from readers. Letters from family members who'd recognized warning signs in their own situations. Messages from professionals who'd been inspired to take elder abuse cases more seriously. Notes from elderly people who'd found the courage to report their own abuse after reading about my experience. Each of these responses reinforced my belief that sharing difficult truths could create positive change. That speaking out about abuse, despite the personal cost, could protect other potential victims and empower other survivors. As I sat down to write thank you notes to the award committee, I thought about the advice I would give to my younger self, the woman who had first suspected that something was wrong but hadn't known how to respond. Trust your instincts, I would tell her. Document everything. Seek help from professionals who understand these crimes. Don't let fear of family conflict prevent you from protecting yourself. Remember that people who truly love you will support you in seeking justice, and people who pressure you to stay silent are protecting the abuser, not you. Most importantly, I would tell her that surviving abuse is not the end of your story. It can be the beginning of a new chapter, one where you reclaim your power and use your experience to help others. The woman who had been forced to wear adult diapers as a form of public humiliation had become a nationally recognized expert on elder abuse prevention. The woman who had been told she was incompetent had written a book that was changing how professionals approach these cases. The woman who had been made to feel invisible had found her voice and used it to speak for others who couldn't speak for themselves. That transformation was the ultimate victory. Not revenge against Brielle, though justice had certainly been served. Not even the recovery of stolen money or dignity, though both had been important. The ultimate victory was the discovery that no one could make me smaller unless I let them. That trauma could become strength. That vulnerability could become expertise. That surviving abuse could become a platform for helping others survive and thrive. At 80 years old, I was busier and more purposeful than I'd been at 70. I had work that mattered, relationships that sustained me, and the satisfaction of knowing that my life had made a positive difference in the world. Brielle had tried to erase me, to reduce me to a powerless old woman who could be controlled and exploited. Instead, she had revealed reserves of strength I didn't know I possessed, and launched me into the most meaningful chapter of my life. That was the story I wanted to leave behind. Not a tale of victimization and recovery, but a testament to the power of fighting back, speaking truth, and transforming trauma into advocacy. The woman who had stood in that nursing home hallway, holding her dignity together by sheer force of will, had become someone who helped others find their own strength in similar moments of crisis. And that transformation, that refusal to let abuse define or diminish me, was the greatest victory of all. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.